Okay, greetings and welcome to another Grenfell MediaWatch update. Today's edition I want to call Council Cuts and those thieving bean counters. Now, this is an update to take place and fill in the gaps of what's happened during the recess of the inquiry, which starts again on Monday. And I'm going to start with reports about council cuts to emergency counselling services for those suffering from PTSD and stress overnight. Now, the council's had the gall to actually issue a statement saying that people can actually use the NHS 24-hour services. And what we're hearing is that this is not the only service that's being cut to Grenfell families and survivors during the gap, especially while the media focus has shifted elsewhere. We've also found out that some bean counters at the council have decided that some £20 million worth of cuts can be done to council services, and they can be blamed on the Grenfell community, and this ain't right. I mean, the question we should be asking is, where has all the money gone? And I say this in light of the fact that we now know that there's been a finance officer who worked for the council embezzling funds meant specifically for the Grenfell survivors. That's right, the council itself embezzling funds and then deciding to cut 20 million of essential services to residents in its borough. But whilst looking at council fraud is actually addressing the economic issue, if we look at this from a political point of view, well, the Equality and Human Rights Commission report has made it very clear that the UK is flouting human rights legislation by failing its duty to protect the lives of its citizens, the right to life in article terms. And what I mean by this is by actually keeping the cladding on place in so many tower blocks across the UK, actually places people's lives at risk. So what does this actually mean? Well, we know that high-rise tenants are actually being placed at risk. Only 17 towers out of 474 have actually been repaired, and by that I mean cladding replaced. In Manchester, we're hearing reports about people told to close their windows for 2 years until they actually resolve the situation. Others are being charged up to £10,000 to remove the cladding, which they didn't actually ask to be put on in the first place. And of course, we should never forget that we live in a capitalist society. So when people have an opportunity to break the law and actually escape from regulations, they'll try to do so. And in this case, what's happening is that private landlords are trying to disguise the fact that their properties have the same flammable cladding on them to basically avoid having to pay anything to put their own residents, their own tenants, in safety. But things are not as simple as they seem. In Wandsworth, where we could say that a Labour council is trying to get things right, we're hearing complaints about residents not being consulted about the retrofitting of fire sprinklers on their property. And this is a strange one. I won't go into the details now, because what you have is a council saying, okay, we're going to do the right thing, and residents saying, well, actually, we're not sure that we actually need them. This is outside the scope of this report. But what is not outside the scope of this report is that Ryhurst, and that's one of the group of companies under the Ryden family, and that's the company that was responsible for the Grenfell refurbishment in the first place, they're actually suing the NHS for cancelling a contract to refurbish NHS stock. Now, the management team of the NHS properties are saying that they've actually taken this unprecedented step of cancelling their contract with Ryden or Ryhurst because of the uncertainty and risk to their patients. They don't want the same company that put the cladding on at Grenfell, that had no regard for really the safety of people, just be doing the same thing to hospitals. So yeah, they're going to be sued, and we haven't heard much about that case, so we'll keep an eye on that one. And so the question now comes to one of support, and where are we when we're looking at the status of BSRs, that's bereaved survivors and residents? Well, we now know that some 92 out of 204 are still living in temporary and emergency accommodation. Things are moving forward, which is something to be commended, but whoa, the pace is way too slow. We're probably looking at 2 to 3 years before everybody is going to be in a home of their own. 2 years compared to 2 weeks. And so perhaps in a way to help us forget that awful reality, what's happening is that the BBC are leading the media circus around the royal family, and its BBC DIY programme, or DIY SOS programme, is going to be broadcast in a week or so. And yeah, I'm not sure that's actually going to change anything. It's good that they're going to be a new boxing club and a community centre, but it doesn't change the fact that justice still hasn't arrived. But for nerds like me, the news that Alan Moore, the famous graphic writer, has come out of, or temporarily come out of retirement to contribute towards a graphic novel project, which is fundraising for those people who are suffering from PTSD. It's fantastic news. Support for the Grenfell family is only getting stronger and stronger. And we saw that again at the carnival. But whilst the solidarity for the Grenfell survivors is fantastic, we've got to remember that we're in this for the long haul. I mean, take a look at what happened to the Hillsborough survivors those who fought for justice for such a long time, only to see, years later, the CPS prosecution against Norma Bettison being dropped by the CPS. Now this is disastrous. And what it reminds us, I mean, in this particular case, they just waited for a key witness to die. And case is dropped. But we really need to be in a position where people with an authority are held to account. They must get their day in court and not be judged by their own peers, some bureaucrats inside the offices who actually awarded them with OBEs, but by a jury of ordinary people like you and I. And if that doesn't happen, then we'll never see justice. So I'm going to close as ever and say, may the ancestors continue to guide and protect us. Asher.